Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I'm Yehuda Shamroth, your hostess, and Josh Wander likes to be with us, but he hasn't been in quite a while because he's very, very busy encouraging people to make Aliyah, and he's busy in Miluim, in the army, and tour guiding, and doing all kinds of wonderful things for Klal Yisrael. So please check his website at israeltorah.org. And of course, Rabbi Winston and all his amazing Torah that we receive from week to week out of the kindness of his heart. And I know he feels it's very important to get this message out. I talk about him all the time because I've really never understood the Geula consciousnss until I met Rabbi Winston many, many years ago. And since then, I've been a big Talmidah and a big follower. And he says MS the truth, and we need to listen to what he has to say. So without further ado, Rabbi Winston is going to talk about the answer with no question. Thanks, Rabbi.
You're welcome. It'd be worse the other way around. What do we mean by this? Let's start with this week's parsha. This week's parsha is Parshas Chukas, Zos Chukas Torah, and Rashi says off the bat, what are we talking about? A special type of mitzvah that Hashem has given to the Jewish people. It's going to start off talking about the Red Heer, the Paraduma, a special mitzvah that was given to us by Hashem to help us, or at least to allow us to leave a state of spiritual impurity, specifically if we come in contact with the dead. That's why, for example, Kohanim, they don't go into hospitals or a cemetery because they cannot be in a situation where they're closed with tuma from the dead. Halacha, even though today everybody's on the level of what's called tuma space because we don't have a red heifer yet. There's actually 10 in history. 9 have already occurred. There's a story about one in the Gemara. And the 10th is supposed to be Mashiach, which is why there's a big deal about every time a red heifer is born in the world. There was one not too long ago, and they were checking it out. If it's halachically, correct, I don't know. I lost track of that. They stopped talking about it. I don't know where it's totally right now. But when Mashiach does come, one of the things will be the red heifer, the paraduma, which will allow us to leave our state of spiritual impurity, which is necessary to be able to go into the temple. And those parts of the temple grounds that we don't go in as of right now because of the fact that we're in the state. There are certain areas that you can go to, and some people do go to, even though it's very controversial. But everybody agrees there are certain areas you cannot go to, which we will only be able to go to once we become purified once again with the waters of the Paraduma. And it's called the Chok because for a couple of reasons. Number one is that one of the laws of the mitzvah is very not logical to us, not human logical. Meaning what? That apparently the Kohen who was the one who sprinkled the person who was impure with the waters, in the process of making the person pure, they themselves became impure. How is it possible? Like 2 people washing from the same tap, and one person's hands get dirty, one person's hands get clean. How is that possible? Same water. The water didn't change. So that's a chok from a melech, the wisest man ever. Said, it's distant from me. I don't understand this law, but Moshe Rabbeinu did. Rashi says, because of this is why the Yetzer Hara lasted us, as well as the nations of the world. They don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to them. They don't like laws that don't make sense. They only want the ones that human logic can decipher and make sense of. So this is not one of those mitzvahs. Cooking milk and meat together also is not one that makes sense, because if it's so bad, so why can the Gentiles do it as well? And of course, shatnez, wearing wool linen, woven together, is also a problem, except in certain situations. But these are laws that they kind of defy human logic. Except that if you look, there are quite a few explanations given. In fact, Rashi himself, in this week's parsha, after saying this, goes ahead and starts to explain some of these mitzvahs. He explains the paraduma, details of the paraduma, the red heifer itself. It comes, red against the golden calf, and it's a heifer as opposed to the calf itself. It's coming to fix up the golden calf because the Jewish people become mortal once again and to die, and therefore it brought back spiritual impurity into the world that had gone away once the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma at Mount Sinai, and that would have spread to the rest of the world as if we kept to it, but we didn't, and as a result of that, we once again became spiritually defiled by the dead, and we haven't gotten out of that. So therefore, the red heifer comes to fix it up. And Rashi brings an analogy of a woman who brings her child to the king's court, and if the child makes a mess, who cleans up? The mother obviously does. if the father's there, he might do it instead. But for the mashal's sake, it's the mother, meaning that the heifer, who's the mother, cleans up for the calf, which is the child. So Rashi himself is giving an explanation. So how do you have it that it's a mitzvah that doesn't make sense, yet Rashi makes sense of it? So the answer is, one of the answers at least, is that a chok is a mitzvah that if God didn't tell us about it, we wouldn't know about it. It wouldn't make sense to us. It wouldn't be logical. For example, what we call bittul barov. You have 3 pieces of meat. They all look the same. 2 are kosher. 1 is treif. You know that for sure. The only thing you don't know is which one's the treif one. Now, the truth is, usually you can tell something because kosher meat's been salted and therefore looks less red. And you see the unsalted meat, it still looks quite bloody. So, but in this case, for whatever reason, you can't tell, or they were cooked. They were cooked, and now the blood's out of all of them, basically. There's a way to make it work. Okay. And you can't tell which one is kosher, which one is treif. So what do you do in a situation like that? There's a 33% chance if you eat all 3 of them, or if you eat all 3 of them, there's a 100% chance you're eating treif. But if you only eat 1, there's a 33% chance that you're eating the treif one. So it's a suffix. It's a doubt. And normally, when it comes to Torah prohibitions in general, when we have a suffix, we have a doubt, we don't know the exact scenario, we're machmir, we're stringent. We go the route that guarantees us not to make a mistake. So technically speaking, based upon how we would understand, logically speaking, a halacha like that, if you would ask a Gentile or a secular Jew, what to do in a situation like that based on the rules of Torah, they would tell you throw all 3 pieces of meat away or sell them to a Gentile, which you can do. But except the basar b'chalav one, you can't. But just a regular tray piece of meat, because better to not live with that doubt that you ate one of the tray pieces of meat than to actually go ahead and eat it. But the Torah says no. The Torah says you can eat all 3 pieces of meat. Why? Because a concept called bittul barov. Now it comes from a halacha achri rabban lahatos, to go after the majority vote. For example, if you have based in and 2 people say innocent and 1 person says guilty, you go after the 2. Now that's logical because you have a doubtful situation and you've got 2 opinions versus 1. So it's logical to think that it's possible that 2 people are right and 1 person is wrong. It's less logical to say that both of them are wrong and the one guy is right. It's possible, and it has happened in life, but it's not the most logical possibility, because once 1 person says it's this way and another person says it's that way, right, the same way, so then it's like it's confirmation in a sense. You still don't know the truth, but it's closer to it, and therefore to go to the majority, because you have to do something. You have to make a decision. The jury has to decide. A lot of times the jury says the guy's innocent, that we find him innocent or not, or at least not guilty. They're not saying that we know for sure he didn't do it. We're just saying based on the evidence, and since we need an outcome to this situation, we need an outcome. Can't just leave it hanging in limbo the entire time. So therefore, we think that this is the most logical outcome. So there, it makes sense, because you don't know the reality. You don't know if it's kosher or treif. You just have evidence for both. So you have to make a decision which is the most likely. But when it comes to 1 for sure treif piece of meat versus 2 for sure kosher pieces of meat, we just don't know which one's which. For sure, the meat is treif. You just don't know which one is the one that's treif. So therefore, in that case, it should not be achri rabban mahatos, and therefore you should throw away all 3 pieces of meat. There are opinions that say throw away 1, so at least the doubt is lessened, because at least 1 possibility you didn't eat it. Some say throw 2, and others, there's an opinion, of course, that says throw all 3. Why? Rabbinically, not from the Torah, but rabbinically. Because one of the things you're hearing from the Torah itself, is that because just analyzing for a moment, what's God saying? When God says, Achri Rabban Hatas, you go up to the majority, even in a situation like that, what's he saying? Is he saying that I permit you to eat treif in a doubtful situation? Well, there's lots of doubtful situations that something is treif, so why can't you do it there? We don't say it like that. Not in a case like that. If you go to some restaurant or to the airport or someplace and you're not sure if this has a heksher, back home this has a heksher, but today it doesn't. Over here in the store, it doesn't. And it can be 2 different factories, which means that in one factory they may have hashgacha, pikuach, right? And in another factory they don't. It's very common in the world today, where you'll find one product has different different factories, and those factories produce for different sectors of the population. So you have one sector of the population which is kosher, and this factory produces for them, but the other ones don't. So you can't simply say, well, this one has a hechsher back home, but here it doesn't, so therefore it must be. Maybe not. Maybe they use the exact same ingredients. Maybe they don't. Maybe they use different pot. You don't know. So in a situation like that, you can't eat unless your life is on the line. If your life is not on the line, then you can't go hungry until you can find vadai kosher food. But in this case, you have majority rules, right? That's a chok. It doesn't logically make sense, except if you say that reality is not what we think it is. And the amazing thing is that 100 years ago, that would have been a completely Kabbalistic idea. Today, not so. Because even physics, thanks to quantum mechanics and theoretical physics, we're now dealing with physical realities that act similarly. For example, Einstein said that nothing travels faster than the speed of light until they came up with the idea of entanglement, where electrons that were very far apart from each other, like, knew information about each other faster than the speed of light. And they came up with the concept of entanglement, that somehow a relationship that is metaphysical supersedes the physical reality, connects them so that information can travel also only in the physical world. That travels only as fast as the speed of light, but beyond the physical world, there might be something else. It's all this in space and time and all these things. They're not such fixed reality. So, which is to be expected. Because if the physical world is just an offshoot of the spiritual world, and as everything the same way that a child, no matter how hard he or she tries to distance themselves from their parents, genetically it's impossible. They are the makeup, of their parents. So therefore, there's going to be similarities, whether they like it or not. And the same is true of the physical world. As much as the physical world may seem so not spiritual, anything, including the worst things in the world, the worst things, the lowest things in the world, cannot exist in the physical world if there's not some kind of spiritual counterpart in the spiritual world. So there's got to be some kind of similarity. So, the idea of a chok, the idea of a statute, of a mitzvah, that doesn't make sense, just means that down here in our level of reality, which seems to be so cause and effect and so based upon a certain type of logic we call teva, nature, right, is so seemingly so fixed that we have difficulty understanding realities that don't fall into the category of everyday life, like a chok, like the paraduma. But if you can go up, as Moshe Rabbeinu did, to the level of Bria, a higher level of spiritual consciousness, where you start to see the inner workings of the physical world on a spiritual level, you start to see how things start to act in a much more pure way, closer to the will of God. You begin to understand how even the paraduma is no longer a chok. You have to, in other words, a chok as opposed to a mishpat. A mishpat is the other kind of mitzvah, which is a judgment. For example, don't steal, don't murder. These are laws that whether you believe in God or Torah, you have to say make sense. Because if you want to go to bed at nighttime, in a sense of security, knowing that your house is not going to be broken into, you have to have mishpatim. Otherwise, society becomes hefker, becomes chaotic, in which case you have to sleep with a shotgun next to your bed because there's going to be intruders all the time. In some communities, that's exactly the way it is, where the mishpat breaks down. So down here, you have mishpatim because they make sense for this physical world, but you go a level higher and you have the level of Shabbos, the consciousness of Shabbos. Shabbos, the reason why you can't do work on Shabbos is not to see if you can withstand the test of not being physically involved in the world. It's because the level of Shabbos is a higher level of consciousness, similar to the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, Adam didn't have to do physical labor. Working and guarding the garden meant the garden was pardes, pshat, rebes, drush, and sod. He had to intellectually work the garden by learning Torah and integrating and going to higher levels of Torah understanding. That was working the garden. On that level, physical activity is a chilul. It's a profanation. You're taking the outside world and schlepping it into the Garden of Eden, or dragging the Garden of Eden down into the everyday, mundane physical world. So on Shabbos you don't do malacha because you go to a level of reality where malacha is irrelevant, and you go higher, you get to the level of chukim. Eventually, they make the most sense. In fact, on the level that the mitzvah paradigm comes from, up in the spheres, you yourself would say we need a mitzvah like that, based upon the rules of creation that we're seeing from this perspective. So that's a chok. So Rashi is basically saying that if Hashem had not introduced this mitzvah, nobody would have come up with it. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu, but the rest of us would never have thought. We would never, and that's why the Gentiles don't have it, and that's why they don't mind mixing milk and meat together, or sewing together, flax and wool, right? Because there's no logic, and they don't see anything. If science were to show that there's something dangerous, also like even something like having fish with meat. Right? We don't have, the Sephardim go one step further and don't have milk with meat either. Milk with fish either. But at least the Ashkenazim, we don't like to have milk and meat, together at the same time. You could have one and rinse your mouth it and have the other. Either way, it's not like milk and meat where you have to be in a specific order. You could have fish first or the meat first. But as long as you rinse your mouth in between, then you make sure your hands are clean like that, because it's dangerous. Now, science will tell you it's not physically dangerous. They haven't found anything as of yet to indicate that it's physically dangerous, because if they did, the whole world would not be having milk and meat together. But we do, right? And that's a little bit more esoteric, because that's not even written in the Torah itself. That comes down as part of a tradition. But certainly milk and meat, that's something that the rest of the world doesn't care about. They have no problem having a cheeseburger, which they do all the time. Or having milk with a hot dog. It's not a problem, but we don't do that. And it's not because we are disgusted by it, because even if you are, that's not the reason for the mitzvah, right? And same with Chazer. All these things have to do with spiritual realities, and which God says basically, I determine what it is. So if I tell you that 2 pieces of kosher meat cancel out a treif piece of meat, I'm basically telling you that all 3 pieces of meat are kosher. How? How did that happen? Nothing physically took place. Nothing physically took place. The meat is the same piece of meat that was before. We just don't know which one's kosher and which one's treif. But we didn't do any kind of scientific process to change the reality of the meat. That's what they're fooling with these days. They're trying to synthesize meat and milk, right? Meat mostly, to get the meat flavor and maybe texture to make artificial meat, fake meat. Right now it's soya stuff, soya meat that doesn't, it's good, but doesn't exactly taste the same. But they're getting very close to it, and they bring up halachic issues, right? Is that called meat or not? Right? Once it's been, extracted and changed, it loses its reality of meat, even though it still tastes and it came from the meat. So then, that's a technical reality that you can't ignore. But in this case, nothing happened to the meat. It's still the same piece of meat. So the rabbi said, throw away 1 piece. Some say throw away 2 pieces of meat because they understand the mentality of people. They're living on a lower level. They're not on the level of consciousness that allows them to be able to say, I'm eating 3 kosher pieces of meat. Rather, they say to themselves, listen, we all know the reality. One of these pieces of meat are treif, and now that I've eaten all 3 of them, I have eaten treif meat with the blessing of heaven. And no, you have not, but they think that they have. So the rabbi said, we're not going to let you do that, because if you do, and here's the clincher, if you do think like that, it's very possible that for you, that meat was treif, if that's the way your thinking is. The same thing we find a very similar halacha by Yibum, right? Yibum is the levirate marriage. Halacha in the Torah, that if a man gets married to a woman and he dies before he's able to have children and he has a surviving brother, in the Torah, remember Yehud and Tamar, it's father-in-law and daughter-in-law, but same halacha, right? And in the Torah, there's a mitzvah, not just that you can, but there's a mitzvah to do what's called Yibum, a special type of marriage with the sister-in-law, even if he has another wife. Doesn't make a difference. He does Yibum, and to try and continue on the deceased, the deceased husband's reality on some level. Halacha, midiraisa, from the Torah itself. If she has one child, she had one child from the husband, even though that child died, and one child from the husband, not only does he not have to do yibum, he's forbidden to do yibum. That would be called gili arais. That would be called an illicit relationship because she had a child. As much as having a child changes a woman's physical reality to some degree, it doesn't change it so substantially that she's a different woman. The fact that she didn't have a child hasn't changed her sister-in-law. There's no physical explanation for it. It's what God said. If God hadn't said it, we wouldn't know about it. But the Gemara says that the rabbis came along and said, no more yibum, only chalitza. We still have to do it to this very day in situations where situations still arise, where a woman can find herself without her husband, with no children, and a brother-in-law. Today we don't have, everyone's monogamous. There's no getting married, but the halacha chalitza then has to be done. There's no option. There's no choice. And it causes big problems because sometimes people are not religious. They don't want to do it. It's weird to them, and whatever, and people end up having to sit unmarried for long periods of time because the brother-in-law won't do chalitza. But it still applies. There's a halacha chalitza this very day, and the rabbis, even the time that yibum was permissible still in the world and from Torah, the rabbis came along and said, no. You know why? Because the very first time that the brother-in-law is together with his sister-in-law, he has to be there for the sake of the mitzvah, meaning his dead brother. That's why he has to be there. After that, she's his wife in every respect. They no longer have to think about him other than a loving memory of the deceased person. But the first time they're together, it's the deraisa mitzvah. And since people were being selfish, they weren't thinking about the deceased brother. So the rabbi said, this is almost like adultery. This is almost like an illicit, not adultery, but like an illicit relationship. Like marrying a sister-in-law, you're not supposed to. So therefore the rabbi said, only chalitza from this point onward. Because the mentality of the person made it almost as if they're doing the wrong thing because of the way they looked at it. Even though from God's perspective, it was completely permissible and even a mitzvah. Not even an efshar, but it was a mitzvah to do it. So you learn from this a very, very important klal, a very important, concept, and that is reality is not what we make it to be. Reality is what God calls reality. He is the reality. Now, achok means that we don't understand why this is a higher level of reality, that the two cancel out the one. We don't understand that, but God does, and therefore we take it on emunah, and faith, that this is the higher reality, and though we cannot relate to it, we do it because that's what a chok is all about, having a emunah and a kodesh baruch Hu. It's nice when everything makes sense, but you don't need a emunah and bitachon when things make sense and they're logical, even though you really do, but you think you don't. But it's when they don't make sense, that's the test of a person's loyalty to Hashem and the Torah. So having said that, having used that as an introduction, it's also, in a sense, an introduction to next week's parsha. Because the next week's parsha, we're going to have the Jewish people, right? They're going to approach Eretz Yisrael. We're getting close about the land. The pilots come on the speaker and say, please fasten your seatbelts, put up your table trays and all that, because we're about to enter Eretz Yisrael. And we had to fight Sichon and Og, who was the security force around Canaan to keep the Jews out, and we beat them handily. And now the people of Canaan are panicking, but not just the people of Canaan, but Balak and Bilam. And Balak and Bilam are not from Canaan. In fact, Balak is from Moab, and Moab, we're told, we can't even attack. And Bilam is from Midian. Balak originally was also from Midian, but Bilam is from Midian, and that's down by the south by Mitzrayim, and we're not even looking to go attack Midian. We only have to go to attack them after this whole episode takes place with Balak. But aside from that, they're not part of the list of Canaanite nations that we have to attack and conquer. So they're all worried. Why are they worried? So the Shem Mishmul explains, because they understood, that the Jew is 600,000 people. They understood saying the Jews don't understand. But they understood that a 600,000 males between 20 and 60 is a magical, mystical, Kabbalistic number. If that many Jews had crossed the Yarden River to enter and settle the land of Eretz Yisrael, that would have neutralized the Sitra Achra, the Satan, right? And the evil would have been gone from the whole world. It would have spread to the whole world. It would have started with Eretz Israel and then spread to the whole world. And the reason we're still in Galus today, believe it or not, is because of Balak and Bilam. The reason why Jews have a difficult time making Aliyah today is because of Balak and Bilam. They started it with the Benot Midian. That's where it began. Reuven, Gad, Menashe, the half tribe of Menashe, chose to live on the east side in which today is Jordan and maybe part of Iraq, right? That they chose to live there because they had lots of cattle, and at that time, I don't think you find any grazing. I mean, in the Jordan Valley, you find grazing land, but they saw a lot of grass at that time, and they thought this is a better place to be, which is absolutely a Pella, Eretz Israel, hundreds of years waiting to go there, promised to our forefathers who loved the land, and these people choose to live in the diaspora. Something's wrong. And the Medrash says something was wrong. And because it was wrong, they were the first to be exiled by Assyria. Not just because they were closest, but because they chose to live outside the Kedusha, and they held off the Gula. And it goes back to the episode at the end of next week's Parsha, with the whole thing with Shittim, with the Benot Midian, and then Pinchas comes along, and he saves the day, but the damage is already done. And Parshas Matos, Reuven, Gad, Menashe come and do the unthinkable by asking Moshe, can we stay over here? Can we not go in? And Moshe goes ballistic, understandably, because he remembers this is a whole new generation, but he remembers the first generation and why they wandered for 40 years in the desert, and after the end of the 40 years of wandering because of that very thing that your ancestors did, you're now going to do it all over again? And God says, forget it. It's not you, it's me they're rejecting. And Galus unto this very day. We sit here today in exile, thank God in Israel. That's a huge step up. But the diaspora Jews around the world, because of that, going back there, that's where it all began. It's Amalekian. But they realized they cannot physically keep the Jewish people out, just by physically fighting them, because that was an Og's job, and if they couldn't do it, then no one's going to be able to do it. So they resort to spiritual means to try to keep the Jewish people out. Eventually they do the Benot Midian, but their first effort, which fails, is to try to bribe God to allow Bilam to curse them, or at least part of the nation, that would prevent that huge block of Jews coming in and bringing the redemption and ending their lives, because evil anywhere in the world would have been knocked off the grid because of the Jewish people taking the land in entirety. So therefore, they bring 42 karbanos. The Gemara makes an absolutely remarkable statement. The Gemara says that a person should do an Aver lo lishma. Sorry. They can't, by the way. There's such a thing as an Aver lo lishma. They should do a mitzvah lo lishma. Yael did an Aver. Actually, no. Let's reverse that. Go back. Was called an Aver lishma. Esther and Yael both did Aver lishma. The Gemara talks about that and something to do with there's a whole discussion about it. But here we're talking about a mitzvah lishma. Mitzvah lo lishma. That a mitzvah lishma means you're doing mitzvah for the right reasons. A mitzvah lo lishma means you're doing a mitzvah, but not because you have intention for the mitzvah or you really care. So, for example, a person decides to give tzedakah, but not because it's a mitzvah, but because simply they want to get the ani off their back. They don't want to look bad in public. So that's a mitzvah lo lishma. Okay, so a person should do a mitzvah lo lishma, right? Meaning it's better to do the mitzvah. A person might say, well, I'm not doing anything with the right intention, so why do it at all? And the Gemara says, no, you still should, because according to some opinions, to do a mitzvah lo lishma, it's better the person wasn't born at all. That's how bad it is. You have to do mitzvahs lishma, learn Torah lishma, because if you don't, then a person chas v'chilila may discount their whole reason for being in the world in the first place. But the Gemara comes in and passes in the end. But it's better to do a mitzvah lishma, lo lishma, than not at all. And it brings us an example. Boy, that was a tough piece. It brings us an example that Balak, because in the schus of bringing 42 karbanos, which is what they bring all together, to try to bribe the Jewish, bribe God. It's Thursday, the end of the week. Get a little tired after a while, right? The schus of that Roose was born to the descendant of Balak, who was Eglon, who was the king at the time of, that was Roose's father, right? So there's a grandson of Balak, I believe, she was a granddaughter, I believe. I think he was a son. I think Eglon was the son of Balak, if I remember correctly. And in the schus of the 42 Karbanas, so Eglon was born, then Roose was born, and of course she became part of the Jewish people. And it's called a mitzvah lo lishma, because he brought karbanas. He didn't have a mitzvah to do so per se, but the question is, if you were to ask Balak and say, look, even if you fail, I've got good news for you. In the merit of bringing these 42 karbanas, you will have a grandchild who not only will not fight against the Jewish people, but she's going to join the Jewish people and become the ancestress of Mashiach ben David, who was going to wipe out people like you in the future. Would he have done it? Would he say, yay, great, it's good to know I have a backup plan. Really, I'm doing it to bribe God in order to curse the Jewish people. But at least if I fail doing that, at least I have the consolation prize of knowing that Ruth will come from me and she'll join the Jewish people, become the foremother of Mashiach ben David. No. Are you kidding? No, thank you. It's not worth the risk. I don't do it at all. If he had known this, he probably would have brought the karbanos b'chlal. So how is it called a reward, first of all? And second of all, is that, why does he even get any reward for what he's doing? So there's a few points to bring up, but the main point for the time being is this. This is very important. You'll see how it's tremendous relevance to the situation today and in general and all through history. First of all, the Gemara makes a statement and says that Hashem does not hold back reward from anybody for any good that's ever done. If someone does good, even without the proper intention to do it, but it's called good from God's perspective, God will reward it. Specifically, that the person will not be owed in the world to come, because they're not going to the world to come. So therefore, God is quick to pay it off in this world, but he will pay it off. It doesn't make a difference who the person, how evil they are. That's why you'll find some evil people have had some success, or even a lot of success. They might have done some good or have been connected to some good in some way, even without the proper intention, and they have to be paid off for that good in this world. So God will reward any type of good that someone does in this world, regardless of who they are. That's what the Gemara said. Why? Because the scales of justice, they demand it. God is 100% fair. We might say, I'm not going to give this guy anything. This guy's he's such a schnook that why should I give him a hand benefit? He'll think the wrong idea. Nah, let him suffer. No, God, not like that. God says, I got to pay everybody their due in this world. But what good was there in what Balak did? What was the good that Balak was being rewarded for? So the answer is pretty obvious, right? In a time of terrible idol worship and of Avodah Zarah, a lot of people would not have done what Balak and Bilam did. They would have instead brought sacrifices to an idol. That was the most common thing in that day. If you didn't serve the Jewish God, which most people didn't, then they served idols. They made up their own religion. The fact that Balak and Bilam were prepared to acknowledge the reality of God as the God of the world and the God of the Jewish people and tried to bribe him because they knew that he ran the world, said something about them. Even though it's for all the wrong reasons and all the wrong intentions, but that's a good thing. There's a silver lining in that very, very gray cloud. And God sees it, and God takes note of it, and he rewards it. He says, look, they brought it to me. I can't ignore that. That determines that they get some type of good back in return. So I'm going to have to reward them for that, and so they're going to get the reward. But why Roose? Why? That's a huge reward. And like we said before, they didn't consider it to be a reward, right? But they will eventually, right? The Gemara says that when Onkelos was trying to determine, he was a Roman, right? And he was trying, and his uncle was Herod, Hadrian, I believe. When Onkelos was trying to decide whether he should become part of the Jewish people or not, he raised people from the dead. He talked to the dead to find out. Apparently, it was much more possible in those days to do it. Still in Roman times, and he talked to evil people from the past who were bad, Bilam, other people, and he asked them, is it worth to join the Jewish people? And they saw things differently there than they did, of course, in this world. Without the Yitzhahara, in Olam Emes, they're suffering Gehenna, terrible, terrible situations, right? Not for a family program. And they basically said the truth, that they are the apple of his eye. They are the people, right? And eventually converted, become the great, Uncle Agir, whose Targum is right there, the Chumash that we open up and read on Shabbos. So the same thing, that Balak and Bilam, eventually they would have seen Roose as being a great thing, that but they would have been proud of her later on, not in this world, but later on, right? But more than that, because it's a very important problem here, very important problem that is very hard to scale, very hard to get over, because of the fact that it seems so from the other direction. And that is, where did Roose come from? She came from the people of Moab. Why are they called Moab? Because that's the name Lot's older daughter gave to her child that she had through her father, when she and her sister thought that the destruction of Sodom was the destruction of mankind, and they were concerned about mankind disappearing. So L'Shem Shemaim, for the proper, for the right kavanah, but the wrong thing, for the proper kavanah, they chose to have a child through their father, even though they knew it was not something that was acceptable. But then Sodom is a place that this was going on all the time anyhow. Right? It wasn't such an out of the ordinary thing for people from Sodom. And she wanted to be clear that this child came from her father. She called it Moab. Now, why did they come from there? This holy spark of Roose came from her, this whole illicit relationship. Well, it's because the spark came from Sodom, right? This daughter, had this spark inside of her because Lot went to Sodom when he left Avraham. Now, why did he leave Avraham? Because they had a fight. Their shepherds were arguing about who was it permissible to use the land or not use the land, because it wasn't yet given to Avraham. And why did they have this fight over the land? Because both were wealthy. Now, how did they both become wealthy? Because of the fact they went down to Mitzrayim, and Avraham had the whole story with Paro, who freaked out, and then Avraham, a rich man, because the miracle he saw with Sarah, right? And he made Lot rich too. Now, why was Lot with Avraham down in Mitzrayim? Because Lot had joined Avraham back in Paddan Aram, because his father Haran had died in Ur Kasdim when he jumped into the fire after Avraham survived it. The reason I'm going back this far is because it was all part of one long stream, one long history that God was controlling, and it goes back even before that. It goes back to the beginning of Ma'aseh Bereshis. The manipulation, the direction of history that God is putting in, to bring about this episode of Lot and his daughters in order to produce, the seed of Mashiach that was in Sodom. And what's doing in Sodom in the first place? Why is the seed down there? It's a very long, not so long, but it's a complicated Kabbalistic topic for another time perhaps. But the main thing is that all the sparks that produce the souls of people originate down in something called the klipos, which is spiritual impurity. All of our souls originate from a level of spiritual impurity. Spiritual, not physical. It's like a spiritual swamp. Ever since Adam Arishon ate the tree of knowledge with evil, the souls fell off of him into the klipos, and the bigger the soul, the holier the soul, the deeper it fell in. So if you want to know what the klipos look like in the world, just look at the world and see where people act the most morally irresponsible, where people act the most like animals, where people do the most forbidden things, as if it's just the way of life. That's a place where the klipos hang out, where they're embodied in a particular people. You don't have to dig 16 feet into the ground to go and look for them. They're not inside the earth. They're not at the core. It's a spiritual reality, down to spiritually speaking. And they will show up. They'll manifest themselves in illicit, anti-Torah behavior. So wherever you're going to find anti-Torah behavior, especially as a way of life, that's where the klipos are going to be the strongest, and that's where the holiest souls, sparks, are going to originate. And Abraham knew this, and Abraham knew it was up to him to get it out, because as the Gra points out, he was Mashiach ben Yosef in his day, and he knew that spark had to come up, but he didn't know how to get it, because everybody in Sodom knew who he was, and he was the antithesis of Sodom. And they wouldn't let him get on. Even Eliezer, his servant, had difficulty down there. So the Avraham, he's not going to marry someone from Sodom to get that spark out. How do you do it? So when Lot came along and said, I'll go, Avram didn't stop him. Even though he's Mr. Outreach himself, Mr. Kiru, he's letting his own nephew go to the very place that he's speaking and preaching against, because he figures that's divine providence. And he's right. And it works out exactly as, not that he foresaw, but he knew that was the means to get it out. And sure enough, he did. Lot married a woman from Stum, who obviously had the spark inside of her, which eventually went to the daughter, which eventually came out, and then eventually became Moab, etc., etc. But the problem is that this is all taking place in the side of Tuma. It's all taking place in the side of spiritual impurity. At some place in time, this spark has to make its way back into the Jewish people. Obviously, that's Ruth converting. When she crosses back into Israel and she converts and she becomes a full-fledged Yers, so that's clearly taking that spark from the side of impurity to the side of Kedusha. But how does it happen? Where does it happen? Why does it happen? When Balak brings the 42 sacrifices to God, not to Avodah Zarah. He doesn't mean to do this, but God manipulates the situation, causes him to believe this is what he has to do, so that he will bring sacrifices. Even in Korach's rebellion, God says to Moshe, all those fire pans that were used for Avera, they were used against what this, but they're holy nonetheless. Because they were used as an incense to God, not to Avodah Zarah, but to God, they're holy. And we melt them down and we use them as a as a lining for the Mizbech and Ketaris. Because they have this Kedusha attached to them. So likewise, because Balak and Bilam were at least offering these sacrifices the way God likes them, the way God wants them, and to God himself, that had the power to take the spark that was in Moab, in Balak and Moab, and change it and purify it. And once it was purified, then Eglon could now give birth to a child who was Rui to go back and join the Jewish people and bring that spark safely after thousands of years in the side of Tumah, deep in the Klippas, to finally bring it out. By the way, there's the same episode to do with Shechem and Dinah too. The Rizal says that Shechem had one spark of Adam Rishon inside of him. It was in the Klippas the entire time. For whatever reason, that's where it was. That's where God kept it. But the time came for it to leave that side and go back into the Jewish people. It happened through Dinah. And that's a terrible episode. I mean, he's killed because A, he no longer has a spark, and B, he does a terrible thing. He does an Avera. He's not rewarded, for he did nothing good about what he did there. It's not like the Karbanos of Balak. So the spark is taken out of him. Side of Kedusha, it becomes Osnos, technically was just adopted by Potiphar, right? And she marries Yosef, and they have Ephraim and Manasseh, and from Ephraim comes Mashiach ben Yosef. That's how God works. That's a hook. That's the answer with no question. Why is it the answer with no question? Because basically, we would never think like that. We would never say that. If you tell people that the reason why the Holocaust had to take place was because the land of Israel, which is holy and primordial, it's not just a geographic location. We didn't just get it as a reward, as God saying, because you're such I'm going to buy you a piece of land, like a father buys his son an apartment. No, it's not God giving the Jewish people an apartment, a place to live. It's the Jewish people at a whole different level of reality. Israel may be part of this earth, this planet, but it exists spiritually in a whole different plane completely. And people just don't know this. They don't realize. And you live here, you sense it. But you read the Gemaras, and they read the Kabbalah about Eretz Israel, and it sounds like it's talking about a whole different universe. Whole different universe. So up there, so spiritual. And the Jewish people had to get back. But not just simply just walk into the land. We're talking about sparks that had to be liberated and freed in order to allow it to happen. And we weren't doing it. But the moment that 6 million Jews died, not the moment, it took several years for this to happen, sparks were liberated. And through Mesiras Nefesh and through suffering and through Kiddush, all the good things, all the holy purifying things. I mentioned this before in the past, and I'll mention it again right now. But one of the most dramatic pictures I've ever seen from the Holocaust is one that I saw in Barrowwine's book on Jewish. He had an uncanny way of digging things up and finding things that nobody else, is aware of, or most people don't are aware of. And there's one picture I'd never seen before. I don't think it was even Yad Vashem. I don't remember. It's a long time since I've been there. But it's this incredible picture. And my first reaction when I first saw it was one of disgust, absolute disgust. I mean, I was angry looking at this picture. What is it? The Nazis loved to ridicule the Jewish people. They loved to. That was their thing. Not just kill them, not just humiliate them, but to ridicule, to make them so like Paro, Mitzrayim, to make us so despondent, to take every last thread of hope away from the Jewish people. And one of the best ways to do that is to take something that they value and use it against them. So what did they do? Some genius of an evil person, right, went ahead and said, let's take the parochas. Let's take that thing they put above the parochas that says, Zeh Shar Hashem, Tzadikim Yavovo. This is the gate of Hashem, that Tzadikim, they pass through it. Because it usually goes over in Aron Kodesh. You put the Sefer Torah back into. So that's very fitting. What do? They put that piece of the parochas and the parochas itself over the door of the gas chamber, mocking the Jewish people. They must have had a great laugh out of that one, mocking the Jewish people, saying, we'll show them how much their God loves them. They'll go to their death by walking through this, and they'll see it, they'll remember it, and it'll be just so much more bitter. And my first reaction was, oh, you wish you could get your hands on the person responsible for that one. But miraculously, without even trying to think about it, association, I don't know. But all of a sudden, I just felt the sense of calm come over me completely, right? And like a little voice said, no, just the opposite. Just the opposite. They think that's what it's doing. They put it there for that reason. Pratis, God, He put it there to say to every Jew who walked into that chamber to die, God said, that's like a Sefer Torah being put back at the Aron HaKodesh. That's how I look at each one of you. Each one of you going to your death here in the gas chambers is like a Sefer Torah being put back in the Aron HaKodesh, because the Nesotzi, the sparks that are going to be liberated and freed through your deaths, are going to go right back to Shemayim, and they're going to be rewarded. And they're going to, whatever happened down here will be for people down here. But where you're going after this is like the Sefer Torah being put back in the Aron HaKodesh. And this is the way God works in history, all through history. So we're looking at a situation today, the world is not going, the proper direction, not going the way we'd like it to go. Mashiach seems so much further away than we'd like him to be. It feels like it could be years before things turn around. We're wrong. We're so wrong. In fact, we're so wrong that you have to be nervous how wrong we are. Because in a moment's notice, just like that, everything can turn around. Because what we perceive as the bad, what we perceive as the ugly and the disgusting, is really just God paving the way for the good to come. And we can't see that. We can't ask about that. We don't understand it. It's a chok. But we have emunah. And the person who has that emunah will live to see how it's true. And that's when the chok becomes a mishpat, something that will make sense to all of us. We should be zeicha to witness and see it in our time very, very soon. I really believe it will be.
Amen. Amen. Rabbi, Shabbat Shalom. And I was thinking of course, about our most recent history with the Nova Festival, October 7th. And those people were sparks of Kedusha as well. And, but they're from a world, so many of them were from a world where they were so far removed from that. Like, you can't tell their families this.
No. But for those for the questioning mind, for the people who are trying to make sense of it and to be able to go on with it and stay strong in their emunah, you have to understand these things.
Okay, I'm just davening that we all come to see this soon. Like you said, the Mashiach should come soon in our days. And I want to wish everybody a very happy end of your week and a safe end of your week. And the soldiers should be protected and the hostages should be released as soon as possible. And Hashem should make us successful. And I want to shout out to Mrs. Rabbi Winston for joining us every single week. She's a very loyal listener. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week, I hope, God willing. Good Shabbos. Thanks, Rabbi Winston.